morning. It's been so good to be here with you this weekend. Very good to be with you this morning to worship together. Especially really important time that we spent around the table today remembering Jesus, the significance of his resurrection, and how important it is to our faith. We've been focusing on all things this weekend that are Jesus-centered. And we want our lives to be focused and built around our Savior Jesus. And so we have done that in the various aspects. And we talked about worship and we talked about other things. And I was given 3 of the topics to speak on and given the choice really of which topic would happen which day. And I chose that we would talk this morning about leadership, about Jesus-centered leadership. Now, some of you are sitting there and maybe wondering, well, that's not relevant to me. I'm not a leader. But I want you to think about this very carefully. You have been called to be a leader. If you have heard the call to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, you have been called to be a leader. Discipleship and leadership are twins. It's just like Bill and Wayne and I, we're twins. The 3 of us. And as you can tell, I'm the math whiz out of that 3. Jesus has called us to be followers, but really, when we follow Jesus, if you follow Jesus and you do the things he does and you focus on all the things that we've been thinking about, you end up being like he is, which is the light of the world. And guess what the light of the world does? It provides light and it provides leadership to those who are in the darkness. Maybe on even a more practical level, if that's too kind of ethereal for you to grasp, is that really leadership? Well, I want you to think about this. How many of you are parents or grandparents? And you have children, you have grandchildren, or you have nephews and nieces that you spend time with, that you invest your interest in. You're a leader. You have a leadership role with them. Are you a teacher, like in Sunday school or in Bible classes or in the school system, in the education system in which we live? Are you a teacher? At your workplace, are you ever asked to train somebody who's coming on new at your workplace? Even if you're not asked to train somebody that comes when you work with other people at your workplace. Whether you're doing it intentionally or not, you are leading by the way you work. In a very real sense, in many different settings, and I could go on and on, I'm not going to, but I think you get it. Leadership is a part of what we do. It's kind of like we start off as children and then we become adults. When we're children, we find it hard to imagine that someday I'm going to be an adult. Someday I'm going to grow up and get married and have children. And like some of you were reminding me, well, you managed 2 out of those 3. And that's what discipleship and leadership is. You are called to be a disciple, and when you begin to grow up as a disciple, you become a leader. It's just a mature disciple becomes a leader. That's what leadership is. And so I wanted us all to think about this morning. Leadership begins with discipleship. In the passage that was read in our hearing this morning, we have Jesus calling his disciples, the 12. You know who the 12 are, probably, and what their significance is. They were called to be disciples, but we know what the result was. They ended up being the apostles who were key to the launch and the establishment of the early church. And, we read in the book of Acts, and of course we have the letters of Paul and Peter and John, and we see that they were key in showing leadership. But before they took on really their role and did the work of apostle, first they needed to learn about discipleship. And for 3.5 years, Jesus invested in them as disciples. And so really what we learn about leadership, we do learn from those 12, but even before that, we learn about it from Jesus himself. And I want us to see Jesus as the model of leadership, how to lead other people. And all of us, I believe, can benefit from this focus. So in the incident with the disciples, Jesus came to where some of them were that he wanted to call to be his disciples. He went to where they were to connect with them. And he shows us that as being the first principle of good leadership, is we need to connect with people in their area of interest. Now, I don't know if Jesus knew very much about fishing. When the people who knew him from when he grew up in the village where he grew up, when they saw him as, oh, this is the carpenter's son. This is Joseph's son, the carpenter. And so most of the time we think that Jesus probably, if he had some interest and he had something that he knew something about in terms of a trade or any kind of work, it was probably carpentry, because that's what his father was. But we do know that when people from the village where he grew up saw him, they said, well, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this Joseph's son? So, as far as we know, he didn't know the fishing business. But he did live near the lake, the Sea of Galilee, where they fished. And when he was calling disciples, he wanted 4 of them that he knew. He wanted them to become his disciples, but he didn't just say, well, come on to town, come down to the synagogue, and let's talk about what it is to be a disciple. Jesus went to where they were. He went to the lake. He went and he saw what they were doing. He saw them cleaning their nets. Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God. So the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God. But Jesus was there for a different reason. He saw 2 boats there at the shore of the lake. I want us to just walk through this slowly. He saw 2 boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and they were washing their nets. That's what the fishermen were doing. And Jesus is noticing them there. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon. I don't think that's an accident. I think he knew whose boat it was. Simon was one of these fishermen that he wanted to be an apostle. He wanted this Simon to come to be a disciple of his to begin with, and eventually an apostle. And Jesus, being Jesus, knew which boat was his. And Jesus got into Simon's boat. And he asked Simon to put out a little way from the shore. And then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. He didn't have to do it that way. He could have said, let's, and he did it other ways. He could have said, he could have gone up, follow me, and gone up the side of the hill and sat down on the hill and taught them while he sat down on the hill and the other people sat down. He did that with people. That's what the Sermon on the Mount was, one of those situations. He could have had the people come back. Let's go back to town where there's, some building or maybe the square, or we could go into the synagogue. Maybe we could go somewhere and I'll do some teaching. But this was really not about so much what he was going to be teaching to the crowds that day. This was about he wanted to connect with those fishermen in their area of interest. So he got into one of their boats and he said, put out a little ways in the water. And then he sat down in this fisherman's boat, Simon's boat, and taught the people. We need to learn how to do that if we're going to be good leaders of people. We need to connect with them in their area of interest. Not everybody that we want to teach the gospel to is going to come to church with us when we invite them. How are we going to share the gospel with them? How are we going to lead them in Christian faith? One of the important things that we need to learn how to do, which Jesus is modeling for us here, is we need to go to their place of interest and connect with them. What do they do? What is their life all about? What are they occupied with? And go and get on their turf or in their boat, which is the case here, and show an interest in that and learn a little bit about what they do and where they come from. Connect with people in their area of interest. I'm going to use a few examples from my experience. And I haven't talked to any of these people about this, so you can forget their names or whatever, or I may not even mention their names, but these are real people and situations. We have a family in our church in Weyburn that has 7 children, and they're all ages. The oldest boys are teenagers, and all the way down to the youngest one, who's 3 or 4 years old now. And it's mostly boys, but there are 2 girls in the family. And the boys have not had any trouble connecting with them. One of them really likes cars, and the other one's like various boys' things that I like. And so I haven't had any trouble at all connecting with them. But how am I going to connect with these, the girls that are in this family? They're a family that homeschools. I didn't have that experience. I grew up going to schools in the city, in Winnipeg and in Lubbock, Texas, and in other places. I went to mostly large schools. When I went to Western Christian College for high school, that was the smallest school that I had ever gone to. I went to big schools, and that was my experience. And so trying to understand how these kids are growing up and getting their education by homeschooling is not my experience. It's probably a little bit like Jesus trying to figure out how he's going to connect with Simon whose whole life is wrapped up with those boats and those nets and that fishing business. And Jesus grew up in a carpenter's workshop. So anyways, but I crochet. And I crocheted a hat that everybody is and I'm not sure whether they're just being kind, but everybody's making comments about, that's a really cool hat. Who made that hat for you? And I said, no, I made this hat. I crocheted this hat. Well, anyways, one of these girls in this family is learning how to crochet. And I found that out when we had the family over for dinner at our house about, I don't know, was it a month, maybe 6 weeks ago, Jane? And so they were at our house, and she spotted my crochet stuff. And so right away I said, oh, do you crochet? And she said, well, yeah, I'm learning how. And so I showed her all my crochet hooks. They're crochet hooks, not needles. Okay, somebody get that right. Okay, you knit with needles and you crochet with hooks. So I was showing her all this stuff and some of the yarn that I have and the pattern books and everything. And ever since that noon meal at our house, that gal finds me on Sunday morning and brings a little critter that she has crocheted and put stuff together and says, look what I made this week. And she said, what are you working on? And I'll tell her about a blanket I'm doing or whatever. I have connected with that girl in her area of interest. Probably up until that time, she didn't know what to talk to me about, and I didn't know what to talk to her about, and we never really had conversations. Now we have a conversation every time on Sundays when that family comes to church. And that's the kind of thing we need to learn how to do with people in general, not just with people who come to church, but with people who you work with a neighbor who you would like to influence, that you would like to lead them to Jesus. So what are you going to do? Throw a Bible at them or something? How are you going to lead them to Jesus? Well, what you need to do first, if you haven't already, probably you know this stuff, but you can see Jesus is doing this. Connect with people in an area of their interest. Then the next thing that happens is this. When he had finished speaking, I think this is kind of interesting. Again, that's why I think this passage has nothing to do with Jesus teaching the multitudes. It doesn't tell us anything about what his lesson was or how long he spoke or anything like that. He says to Simon, put out into the water with the boat and then he sits down and he teaches the people. And without a hint about how that went or what he said or anything, it jumps right away to verse 4. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked all night, but caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats, and so that they began to sink. Here's a second principle that Jesus shows us. After you've connected with people in their area of business, in their area of interest, then you need to open a window into their hearts. Open windows into the hearts of people. Jesus knew because he's Jesus, that Peter had fished all night and caught nothing. And I don't know, maybe you could even see it in Peter's face and in his partners as they're cleaning their nets. You know, all night long we've been fishing and we caught nothing. This was not a great day. And Jesus decided, okay, I maybe don't know everything about fishing, but I know what would get to the heart of Peter is if he had this amazing catch of fish. That would turn his day around, and I'm going to do that for him. Now, you're probably not going to be able to do everything that Jesus was able to do, but there will be things that you can do, and sometimes they're little things. This was a big thing, obviously, but sometimes it's just a little thing that you can do to open a window into someone's heart. Again, I'm going to tell a story from recent experience. One of our elders in Weyburn, his mother is in a care home, and she had a bad fall and broke her glasses. And she's not well. She's nearing the end, really. Is the reality. And her glasses broke, and she was quite upset because she didn't have her glasses. Well, she doesn't really read anymore. She doesn't have a lot of mobility. She probably doesn't need an expensive pair of glasses, and she's not going to probably need glasses for very much longer anyways. But her son, who's one of our elders, he remembers that when he was a young child and they were a family with lots of kids, and sometimes not very much money to live on, that when he needed glasses, his mother had taken him when they were in town, and he'd gone to the optometrist, and the optometrist said, your son needs glasses here. And he thought, well, I'm not going to get glasses because we can't afford glasses. But his mother took him, and they went and they got glasses, and she said to him, yes, we don't have a lot of money, but you needed glasses, and I wanted to make sure you had glasses. And so when this happened to her, when she fell and her glasses broke, even though some of the rest of the family and people who are deciding about her care didn't think it was a big priority, he said, this is a big priority. She wants to get her glasses fixed, even though she doesn't see and doesn't maybe need them as badly as she has for all her life, but I'm going to make sure she gets her glasses. And he did that. And that's what he was doing with her. He was opening a window into her heart by making sure that she got her glasses, because 60 years ago, she had done the same thing with him. She opened a window into her son's heart by making sure he got his glasses when the family probably really couldn't afford to at that time. It's very important that if you're going to lead, if you're going to have some input, and you know this, if your parents or grandparents, you're doing this all the time. You're opening windows into the heart of your grandchildren or into your children. You're doing stuff for them. You're showing them love, unconditional love, probably undeserved love, in sometimes big ways and sometimes little ways, but you're doing these little things, giving them these precious gifts, because you want to have that input into their life. You love them. And so that's another aspect of leadership. It's opening windows into the hearts of people, and that's what Jesus did with Simon. I don't know what he said to the crowds, but the important thing Jesus was doing that day didn't have anything to do with the crowds. It had to do with this man named Simon. I want to open a window into this man's heart. so that he will become my disciple. What happened next? But when Simon Peter saw it, okay, so after they brought in this catch of fish, their nets were breaking, the boats were sinking, the partners had to come and help. He fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish they had taken, and so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Simon didn't really understand, or didn't until that moment know what Jesus was up to. And once he recognized what Jesus had done and the marvelous way Jesus had blessed him, all of a sudden Simon felt unworthy. Like, I'm just a sinful man. I mean, you know, if you're looking to do great things and invest in people, look at all this crowd that came out to hear you teach and everything, and I'm just a sinful man. He threw himself down at Jesus' feet. He didn't feel like he was worthy of Jesus' attention. Certainly not the attention that Jesus had just given him. But you see what Jesus had done, which is what good leaders do. Jesus saw more in Simon Peter than Simon saw in himself. When Jesus looked at Simon, he didn't see just a fisherman. He didn't see just a sinful man like all the other people in the crowd. Jesus saw this man could be a really great leader in the church that I've come to build. This man can do that. Simon didn't see that. Simon, I don't think Simon probably had thought about doing anything else but fishing. Simon saw himself as a fisherman. Jesus saw him as an apostle. And that's what leaders do. Leaders, when they connect with people, and then when they open windows into their hearts, and then they see in those people something more than what they see in themselves. That's what great leaders do. And don't underestimate what people can be and what people can become. Probably Peter's brother and the sons of Zebedee who were fishing with him probably wondered themselves, why are you interested in Peter? You know, he's always saying the wrong thing, sticking his foot in his mouth. He's impetuous, and he just jumps in and does things and makes a lot of mistakes. And you maybe should sit on him, not call him to some special position. You need to hold him down. But Jesus saw Peter and saw more in Peter than even Peter saw in himself, and probably more than anyone else saw in Peter. You've had people like that in your life who probably encouraged you to be where you are. And learn from what they did. I had a lot of people who invested in me over the years, who connected with me. A lot of people here in Winnipeg where I grew up, in Dauphin where I was in junior high, and Western where I did high school, and other places. But there's one man who really saw something in me that I didn't see. And I'm now preaching in a church where he used to be a minister, where he was the minister. And I had no vision that that could ever be something that I would do. And I've now been in Weyburn 11 years preaching for the church in Weyburn. When I was a teenager in Weyburn going to school there, I would have never imagined that. But Clinton Brazel, some of you know who he is. He saw something in me that I didn't see, that I would have never imagined. And he told me, he said, you're going to be a preacher someday. And so you need to just keep practicing. And he would send me off on young Timothy assignments. And I would go to these little churches and curse them with my preaching. And I learned. And he, and it was interesting. I think many people, when they think of Clinton Brazel, probably don't think of him as a great leader. But I'm telling you, he led a lot of us young people because he did exactly these things which Jesus does. He approached and connected with us in our area of interest. He opened windows into our hearts. He saw more in us than we saw in ourselves. And then he did what Jesus did. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. So this is the fourth principle I see Jesus exercising here. Challenge people to be more than they are right now. And that's what he did. He encouraged me. He said, you're doing fine. He said, but I know you can do better than you're doing right now. Keep at it. And he challenged me to be better than I was. And I think I am a little better than I was when I was 14. The order in which Jesus did that with Peter made all the difference. Peter, and not just Peter, but also his brother Andrew, and not just his brother Andrew, but the partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. The four of them left their boats. Says they left everything and followed him to become his disciples. This is Jesus-style leadership. And like I said, the order in which he does these things is very important. Connect with people in their area of interest. Open windows into their hearts. See more in them than they see in themselves. And then challenge them to be more than they are right now. That's Jesus-style leadership. And we can do all of that. I do have one more scripture I want to share. John 13, starting at verse 12. After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I've done to you?" This is now at the end of 3.5 years of training Simon Peter and the rest of them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. So leadership begins with discipleship. Now that they had become disciples, Jesus called them now to be the leaders. Now do for others what I've done for you. Lead from your knees. I want you to picture, that's why I read this passage. Jesus kneeling down, washing his disciples' feet. Lead from your knees. Be fully surrendered to the Lord's will. That means being on your knees before God. Be constantly in prayer. That's leading from your knees. And be humbly engaged in serving others. That's Jesus-centered leadership. Jesus-centered leadership.